known as Stonehenge. This imposing monument has dominated the imagination of archaeologists and visitors for centuries.
Imagine, for nearly 5,000 years, there has been a place standing in front of us that humans still have not been able to fully understand. We know its name is Stonehenge, we can see its stones, but why it was finally built and what the people who built it knew, we still do not have a clear answer. But in 2026, the way of looking at this mystery changed. This time, researchers did not rely only on old theories. They put years of surveys related to Stonehenge, geophysical scans, excavation records, astronomical calculations, LiDAR, and ground-penetrating radar data in front of an AI. And the most surprising thing was that AI did not start with those massive stones that everyone looks at. It focused on those 56 pits, which had been almost ignored for centuries. At first glance, they simply look like old, random pits. But when the distance between them was looked at together, a pattern appeared that changed the way we look at the entire Stonehenge. So, what connection did these 56 pits have with the moon? And if they were really part of some astronomical calculation, then how much did the people who built Stonehenge 5,000 years ago know about the moon? To find out the answer, stay with the video until the end, because what comes next might completely change the way you think about Stonehenge. Before we move ahead in the video, subscribe to the channel so you can watch videos like this first. Now, let's come to the discovery that gave the entire story of Stonehenge a new turn. Inside the outer circle of Stonehenge, there are 56 small pits, which today we know as the Aubrey Holes. They were named after John Aubrey, a 17th century person interested in archaeology who was the first to record them. But for all these years, these pits were not considered something very important. Some pits contained human remains left after cremation, while some were completely empty. And the biggest thing was that the distance between them was not the same. So, for a long time, it was believed that thousands of years ago, the people who made them had simply dug them according to their own understanding. But when the large Stonehenge dataset was placed in front of AI, it did not ignore these pits. It calculated the position of all 56 pits one by one and the distance between them. Then, across the nearly 87-meter circle, it looked at the distance from one pit to the next, all together. And this is where the story suddenly changed. The distances were not random. When they were placed on a graph, a repeating up and down pattern appeared, which looked like a sine wave. But the real surprise came when this pattern was compared with the moon's 18.6-year lunar nodal cycle. A connection appeared between the two that was not easy to simply call a coincidence. And then, the number 56 also raises a question. 3 cycles of 18.6 years make 55.8 years, which can be considered approximately 56. That means these 56 pits could be seen as a kind of record of 3 complete cycles of the moon, created on the ground. But if people thousands of years ago had really understood this movement of the moon, then the real mystery was still left. How did they put it on the ground with such accuracy? Now just imagine that around 5,000 years ago, without any telescope, computer, or modern equipment, a human was trying to understand this movement of the moon. The moon does not rise from the same place every night, and it does not set at the same place every day. Its position keeps changing slowly, but these changes happen so slowly that by watching for just a few nights, no one could guess what was happening. For this, they would have had to watch the sky continuously for years. They had to understand where the moon was rising, where it was setting, and how its position was changing over time. And if they wanted to understand the complete 18.6-year cycle, they would have needed to keep an eye on this change for almost 2 decades. But the real difficulty was not just watching the moon. They also had to put that information onto the ground. Within the nearly 87-meter circle of Stonehenge, placing these pits in such a way that they became part of a larger pattern would have required a lot of attention to distance and direction. This means someone did not just collect information by looking at the sky, but turned that information into a fixed design on the ground, and this was probably not the work of one person. It is possible that one generation watched the moon, the next generation passed that information forward, and then a later generation created the pits based on that same knowledge. In other words, Stonehenge may not contain just stones, but information that had been passed down through generations. Interestingly, in Western astronomy, the moon's 18.6-year cycle was formally understood and recorded much later. According to the data you provided, this kind of calculation had appeared by the time of Edmund Halley in 1693. But another mystery was waiting for us here, because Stonehenge did not contain only things that could be seen with the eyes. There was also something that the eyes could not see, but perhaps the human body could feel. It was sound. Until now, we have always thought of Stonehenge as just a large circle of stones. But when AI looked at its structure from a different point of view, another interesting question came up. Were these stones used only for viewing, or was there also some purpose connected to sound behind them? Instead of looking at the height and direction of the stones, AI created an acoustic simulation of Stonehenge. It imagined that when all of its large sarsen stones were standing in their places, and the lintels on top were also in place, how sound would move inside it. The diameter of the entire circle was around 33 meters. The height and width of the stones, along with the structure built on top, could have created a closed environment where sound would not disappear immediately like it would in an open field. Instead, it could bounce back from the stones and become stronger in some places. But the most surprising thing came up around a specific low-frequency range, around 95 to 120 Hertz. In simple language, this is a range around very low-frequency sounds that humans do not easily experience like normal conversation or music. The effects of such low-frequency vibrations on the body and brain have also been discussed in scientific studies and experiments before. In a 2003 study by Vic Tandy and Tony Lawrence, a possible connection between low-frequency sound and some unusual physical or mental experiences was also discussed. You might feel your heartbeat becoming faster, experience uneasiness or confusion about direction, and in some situations, even your visual experiences could be affected. But the biggest question in the story was still left. The claim that Dr. Marcus Chin rechecked the simulation also came forward, and it was suggested that the geometry of the structure was quite important for this effect. In other words, Stonehenge was not just a beautiful circle of stones. Its structure could also change the way sound behaved. But if all of this was intentionally designed, then the next question becomes even more mysterious. Who exactly was buried in these places? Until now, we had two different things in the story. On one side, there was the structure of Stonehenge, which could make sound stronger in some specific places. And on the other side, there were human cremation remains found at the same place. But when these two things were looked at together, the story suddenly became even more interesting. Low-frequency sound does not remain the same throughout the entire Stonehenge circle. Because of its structure, sound waves can come together and become stronger at some specific places. These places are called acoustic nodes. Now, AI started comparing the locations of these nodes with the old excavation records, and this is where an unusual pattern was claimed to appear. The places where the acoustic simulation showed a stronger effect were also the areas where larger amounts of human cremation remains were reportedly found. In other words, the bones and remains left after cremation were not spread randomly throughout the entire circle. If this pattern is correct, then it would not simply mean that Stonehenge was a place where the dead were buried. The question would become much bigger. Were people placed in those specific areas because the sound and vibrations of the monument were strongest there? Did the people there understand this acoustic behavior? And if they really did, then it would mean that the people who built Stonehenge were not thinking only about stones and the sky. They may have also known how sound changed inside the structure they had created. But then another major turn comes into the story, because AI did not stop at looking only at the things inside Stonehenge. It also started looking at the land spread around the entire monument, and the pattern that appeared there raised another big question. Maybe Stonehenge itself was not the biggest part of this story. Maybe it was only one part of an even larger design. But when AI started looking at the land outside Stonehenge, the story suddenly took a very big turn. This time, it was not just the stones that were looked at. Maps of the land from LiDAR, ground-penetrating radar scans, and old archaeological records were placed together. For this, the large amount of data from the Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes project was also used, which Professor Vincent Gaffney's team prepared after surveying the surrounding area for nearly a decade, with the work completed in 2020. When looked at separately, all these things may have simply appeared to be normal archaeological marks. But when AI overlaid all of them together, a pattern started to emerge on the ground that was difficult to ignore. In many places, there were burial mounds built in geometric shapes. Some earthworks stretched for several kilometers in almost straight lines. There were timber circles in some places, while some structures were positioned in directions that created alignment with specific astronomical events. That means this was not simply a single monument built in one place. It looked as if the entire surrounding landscape was part of a much larger design, and Stonehenge had been placed in the middle of that design. And here, the most interesting part of the story is the chronology. Many of the earth structures and burial mounds in this landscape are said to date to around 3,500 to 3,000 BCE. That means these structures were even older than the large Sarsen circle that we now see as the most recognizable image of Stonehenge. If these dates and patterns are correct, then the meaning would be quite surprising. Maybe Stonehenge did not create this landscape. Maybe the landscape was already prepared, and Stonehenge was later placed very carefully within that larger design. But now one question had become even bigger than before. If the entire blueprint was already there, then where did this knowledge reach the first generation from? And did the people who built it themselves even know how big a thing they were creating? Until now, one thing had been appearing again and again in the story. The people had a good understanding of their place and their work. But when the accuracy of different construction stages was looked at together, a pattern appeared that was not normal. Usually, in any civilization, as time passes, the work gets better. The first generation learns something, the next improves it, and the people who come after make that technique even better. But in Stonehenge, the picture was claimed to be completely opposite. The early construction was more accurate, especially in the early bluestone arrangement and the later Sarsen phase. There was such precision that it seems the builders had a good understanding of the structure and its acoustic behavior. One figure makes this difference even clearer. In the early Sarsen phase, the average error in the positioning of the stones was said to be around 3.2 centimeters. But by the final stages of construction, this difference had increased to around 12.7 centimeters. That means almost 4 times more. Such a big difference is difficult to explain just by bad weather, tired workers, or an occasional mistake. So why did this happen? This is where the story of lost knowledge comes in. It is possible that the early people had not just one method, but a complete understanding behind it. They knew why a stone had to be placed in a specific position, and how even a small mistake could change the entire effect. But over time, that same information may have become weaker as it was passed from one generation to the next. and this has also been looked at in connection with the physical abilities of the people. In the context of Dr. Andrew Chamberlain's 2015 skeletal study, no major biological difference was found between the later builders and the earlier people that could explain this drop in accuracy. So the problem was not that the later people were weaker or less capable. Maybe they simply did not have the same information anymore. One generation knew why this work had to be done. The next generation may have known only how to do it. But was there any other evidence that this knowledge was becoming weaker over time? The answer may have been hidden right on the surface of the stones. When a stone was cut or shaped by humans thousands of years ago, marks from their tools could still remain somewhere on its surface. By looking at these marks, it is possible to get an idea of how the stone was worked on at that time. In the 2012 laser scan archive of English Heritage, 833 different tool marks on the sarsen stones of Stonehenge were recorded. At first glance, these may look like just small marks, but when they were looked at together, a difference between the early and later construction stages started to appear. The tool marks on the early stones look more controlled and systematic. It seems that the people doing the work clearly knew how much pressure to put on the stone and how to shape it. But on the later stones, the picture was a little different. In many places, different techniques can be seen over one another. Some marks also show signs of weathering between them, creating the possibility that the stone was worked on at one time, then left, and many years or decades later, another person worked on it again. AI pattern recognition tried to understand this change by dividing these 833 tool marks into different groups based on their techniques, and this is where the most human part of the story comes forward. It is possible that in the beginning, the craftsman had not just one technique, but a complete understanding behind it. They knew why the stone behaved the way it did and how to achieve the correct result. But by the time the later generations came, perhaps that same knowledge had become nothing more than a copy. Think of it this way. One generation knew why the work had to be done. The next generation only knew what the finished work was supposed to look like, and perhaps that is why Stonehenge continued to be built. But the real knowledge behind building it was slowly lost. Now, a question comes up. If the knowledge of building Stonehenge was slowly becoming weaker, then why was it finally abandoned one day? Around 1600 BCE, activity at Stonehenge started to stop. After that, for nearly 3,400 years, there was no major construction or change there. At first glance, it may look like a place that people simply left behind, but usually, when an ancient place is suddenly abandoned, some signs can be found. Things are left behind, unfinished work can be seen, or there is some evidence of destruction. The picture at Stonehenge was said to be a little different. Here, there were signs that some stones were not simply left to fall, but were placed down in a controlled way. It was also claimed that structures around some specific acoustic nodes were covered with layers of soil and chalk as if they were being intentionally protected. These layers were also not considered to be just soil that had collected over time. Some geophysical evidence suggested the possibility that they had been compacted in a specific way, so that the structures underneath could be protected from water flow and erosion. So the question is no longer, why did the people leave this place? The question changes to, what did they preserve here when they left? The excavations carried out by Dr. Mike Parker Pearson of University College London between 2008 and 2014, along with his 2012 work, also discuss the interpretation that things were intentionally placed and the site was closed during the final stages of Stonehenge. If this interpretation is correct, then Stonehenge was not simply a ruin that people forgot. Think of it like an old library being closed. The books are not thrown away. They are carefully kept inside. There is simply no one left to read them. Maybe something similar happened with Stonehenge. The people did not destroy it. They closed it. And now the biggest question was, what exactly were they trying so hard to preserve? By now, several pieces were in front of us. 56 pits, the moon's 18.6-year cycle, specific points where sound became stronger, and a landscape that was much bigger than Stonehenge. But perhaps the biggest question in this entire story was still left. Who exactly were the people who were buried here? At least 63 people's cremation remains have been reported from Stonehenge. They are dated to around 3,100 to 2,500 BCE. That means these people belong to a time when the construction of the large sarsen stones had not even reached its later stages. Then came isotope analysis. Strontium isotopes found in teeth can help estimate the kind of geological area where a person lived during childhood. In this analysis, at least 15 people showed signs that were different from the surrounding Salisbury Plain area. Their isotope signatures matched the geology of Western Wales, the same area from where Stonehenge's famous bluestones are believed to have been brought. The 2018 isotopic research connected with Dr. Christoph Snoek also pointed toward a possible connection between these people and Wales. But the story does not end here. When the burial locations of these Wales origin people were compared with the acoustic nodes, it was claimed that the remains of 9 out of the 15 people were within around 1.2 meters of the main acoustic node, and their ages also did not seem normal. They were mainly people over 45 years old and teenagers between 14 and 18 years old. There were very few people in the middle age group. That means perhaps just anyone was not being buried here. There may have been some kind of selection based on place, age, and origin, all three. And now put all the pieces together. 56 pits, the moon cycle, the acoustic chamber, specific burial points, people who came from Wales, the hidden landscape, knowledge that slowly disappeared, and finally, the intentional closing of Stonehenge. Maybe Stonehenge was not the story of one king, one temple, or one tomb. Maybe it was the final trace of knowledge that the generations who built it slowly forgot themselves. If you found this story interesting, then like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, what do you think was the real purpose of Stonehenge?